What you're about to see will blow your mind. I've always known deep down in my heart that science isn't the proof for the non-existence of God that atheists and agnostics make it out to be. But seeing Stephen Meyer lay it out for Piers Morgan in such a scientific, elaborate way is not only refreshing, but also a massive revelation. Before we get down to it, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification button for more videos like this.
This all blew up last week because Tucker Carlson went on Joe Rogan. And I don't know if you saw this, but he said this about this very issue. Take a look.
If evolution is real, and if there is this constant, I don't know, but it's visible. Like you can measure it in certain animals.
You can measure adaptation.
Yeah.
But there's no evidence that in fact, I think we've kind of given up on the idea of evolution. The theory of evolution as articulated by Darwin is like kind of not true. Right?
In what sense?
Well, in the most basic sense, the idea that, all life emerged from a single cell organism and over time, and there would be a fossil record of.
This might not even be the biggest talking point in the video, but I think it needs to be said. Most times when people don't like pushback against a system of thought, a process, or an action, they tend to take up arguments like, well, are they really qualified to be saying this or that? And in this case, I can see how that might happen. It is Tucker Carlson after all. He's excellent at a lot of things, but he's no scientist. So how can he know what he's saying, right? Well, he might not be on par with scientists and their amazing depths of knowledge, but you'd be amazed at the things you can learn when you're interested in knowing the truth. And they're valid enough to give you a meaningful conclusion, especially in an issue like the creation of the universe. Most of us just take the obvious signs around us and run with it. But it's nice to see what Stephen Meyer said about this.
Maybe we start with something that happened here in London a few years ago. 2016, a major conference convened by the Royal Society, arguably the world's most august and prestigious scientific body, was convened by a group of evolutionary biologists who are dissatisfied with the standard neo-Darwinian theory of evolution. And many of the conveners are calling for a new theory because the primary mechanism of biological change articulated by Darwin and his subsequent followers, now called the neo-Darwinists, the idea of natural selection acting on random mutations and variations, is now understood to lack the creative power to generate major changes in the history of life. There's two issues, really. There's how do you get to the first life from the simpler non-living chemicals. That's sometimes called chemical evolutionary theory, and that's a complete mess. It's in a state of impasse, and almost everyone, even your recent guest Richard Dawkins, acknowledges we have no chemical evolutionary theory that accounts for the origin of the first life. And many people don't know that Darwin didn't attempt to explain the origin of the first life. Rather, he presumed one or very few simple organisms, which we now know were not simple, and then proposed a mechanism by which you could generate all the new forms of life we see on the planet today. But even that now is being challenged because the main mechanism of evolutionary change does a nice job of explaining small-scale variation. What Tucker was referring to, I think, is adaptation. This would be examples like Darwin's finches, where the beaks get a little bigger, a little smaller in response to varying weather patterns. But it does a very poor job of explaining the major innovations in the history of life, such as the origin of birds or mammals or animals in the first place. And there in the fossil record, we do see very abrupt, many instances of very abrupt appearance without the transitional intermediates that you'd expect on the basis of the Darwinian picture of the tree of life.
So is your belief that the Darwin theory actually fails then?
I think it does fail. I think it captures an element of the truth. There's the small-scale microevolutionary variation is certainly a real process, and no one disputes that. Natural selection is a real process, but what's at issue now is the degree to which it has genuine creative power.
While it's great to see Tucker wasn't talking out of his neck, I think it also helps to highlight Stephen's approach to this issue. I like that he didn't just go straight into his personal verdict, even though he is qualified to. Going by how long he's been doing this, I think he understands better how any attempt to uphold facts as his personal discovery alone might get them downplayed. So, he refers to the judgment of a credible body of qualified scientists, which gets the pass any way you want to see it. I might not know how things get done in other communities, but in the scientific community, if a large body of scientists agree on a specific claim, it's no more a conspiracy theory, it's legit. Finally, people can now accept what some of us have known for a long time. However, Stephen doesn't just pull apart scientific theories of creation. Instead, he does something far more interesting. He uses scientific theories to support the existence of God.
You argue there are three big scientific discoveries that point to the existence of God. I want to go through these. One, the Big Bang Theory. So why would that lend support to a theory of a God? Or
Well,
God?
right. Maybe just a little framing before I dive into the evidence. Professor Dawkins at Oxford has said that the universe has precisely the properties that we should expect if at bottom there is no purpose, no design, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And though I'm on the opposite side of this science v. God issue with the good professor, I think he does a marvelous job of framing key issues. And this is one of those great framing quotations. Because what he's saying is that whether we think of it as a scientific question or a philosophical question or both, if we have a hypothesis about reality, the way we test that is by looking at the world around us and seeing if what we see comports with what we would expect to see if our hypothesis were true. And his hypothesis is that of blind, pitiless indifference, which is a shorthand way of saying that everything came about by strictly undirected material processes. And what the materialists expected coming into the early 20th century was evidence of an eternal, self-existent universe, one that had been here for an infinitely long time and therefore did not need an external creator. What in fact the astrophysicists, the cosmologists, the astronomers found was evidence of a universe that had a definite beginning, and therefore one that could not have created itself, because before the matter of the universe came into existence, there was no matter there to do the causing. And so the picture of the universe that has emerged starting from the 1920s all the way to the present, both from observational astronomy and from theoretical physics, is a universe that had a definite beginning and therefore requires some sort of external creator or cause.
You want to know what I think? I think there will always be scientific theories to explain the creation of the universe, and that they'll always be weaponized in a science versus God debate. However, science has always been humanity's microscopic lens for otherwise invisible gears that make up the universe. In this regard, I can see how it shows us the underlying fabric of what God put in place, and how he got it all working. Science, after all, doesn't make things up, it shows us what already exists. Presently, it's that the universe is not the eternal structure of existence that early scientists made it out to be. Therefore, it can't be sentient or all-powerful. And that's where I think this entire science versus God argument took its first hit. The Big Bang Theory is the most widely accepted scientific explanation for creation given supportive evidence like Hubble's law. Elements like hydrogen, lithium, and helium found out there in space, elements which are responsible for light, mind you, and CMB radiation. And it shows that the universe had a definite beginning. Clearly, anything that had a beginning was created. And if the universe didn't exist at some point, how could it have created itself? Rather, the supporting evidence for the Big Bang kind of reminds me of Genesis 1:3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. What you're about to see next might be the end of the debate for some, but I think it's really good food for thought for us all.
Do you believe that God created this original single cell from which everything flows to us?
Oh, the single cell as opposed to the universe.
Well, I guess
Yeah.
you go back to the universe,
Yeah,
and then you go back to the creation of a single cell that has this incredible complexity that eventually, through the process of evolution, leads to human beings.
Yeah, I do think there's.
Do you believe that's really
I do
the
think-
most likely scenario?
Yeah, I do think there's incredible evidence of intelligent design at the point of the origin of life, because that first simple cell, in the 19th century, Thomas Huxley said that the cell is a simple homogeneous globule of undifferentiated protoplasm.
Brilliant phrase.
Wonderful. He was one of the great scientists of the 19th century, but we know so much more now that he didn't know. And what we now know is that inside even the simplest cell, we have digital nanotechnology. We have the information stored in the DNA. We have an exquisite system of information storage, transmission, and processing. And that information is being used to build protein machines and other even more complex nanomachinery inside the cell. So it's a sort of automated factory run by digital information. When we see information in a digital or alphabetic or typographic form, and this is what we actually see in the DNA, when Francis Crick elucidated what he called the sequence hypothesis in the late 1950s, he realized that the 4 subunits along the interior of the DNA are functioning like alphabetic characters in a written text or digital characters in a section of software. What we know from experience is that whenever we say information of that sort, it always comes from a mind. Bill Gates, our local hero, has said that DNA is like a software program, but much more complex than any we've ever devised. Richard Dawkins has acknowledged that it functions like a machine code. Well, what we know is that software comes from a programmer. And in fact, whenever we see information of that kind, whether it's in a software program or a hieroglyphic inscription or a paragraph in a book, it always arises from a mind, not a material process.
Can we take a moment to talk about the delicate structure and system within the cell? We've probably heard about it like a dozen times, but Stephen, laying it out in this manner and in this context gives it a different light, don't you think? The analogy Bill Gates uses to describe the structure of a cell and the amount of information that is going on there is spot on. It has to be the easiest way to get people to see how deliberate creation is down to the tiniest microscopic level. The amount of information that these cells pass among themselves is really like software or machine code. But want to know what the funny thing is? Everywhere in the world such a feat is encountered, and I mean everywhere, the human mind automatically assumes the presence or existence of a creator. But when it comes to the universe we live in, suddenly a painting can paint itself and a laptop can create itself. And that makes sense. I mean, they'd do anything other than admit there's a God, right? It's really got me thinking, what is the real issue here? Why is the atheist and the agnostic so obsessed with weaponizing science against God that they will ignore the obvious? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. If you found this video interesting, you'd be doing someone a favor by sharing it with them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.